Thank you, Professor Gibbs. All right. So I want to introduce our three venerable judges here who are in the front. I really appreciate them taking time out of their schedule to be here and help with this. The front is Dr. Jeff Hill from the School of Family Life, and Dr. John Hoffman from Sociology, and Dr. Nwako Yamawaki from Psychology. So let's give them a round of applause. So according to, you all have seen the rules, right? Are there any questions on the rules? Nobody brought a brass band. Nobody brought an extra, a clown outfit, I hope. I think that's good. So are there any questions on the rules? So how this will work is when we'll start with the first student, and we'll go to that slide, and the slide will actually be their name. And so they get all set up. You'll have to get on the microphone, and then you get stood over here. And Sara, also, let's give Sara Donachie a round of applause too. She's from the dean's office, and she's helped put this all together. I really appreciate her help. She's keeping time too. So when you're all ready to go, you can signal to me, and I'll switch to your slide. And when that happens, you have 3 minutes from that point. And Sara will, if you keep going, as soon as the 3 minutes up, boom, you're done. You can't say anything after those 3 minutes. Yes? She has a 1 minute and 30 seconds. So keep an eye on Sara as you're going along. And that'll give you an idea if you're waxing poetic and you all of a sudden you have 2 seconds left. That's always a problem. Yes. You can use your notes and reading. That's fine, but just you can't use props. Yeah. So that's. Does it have to be memorized? Yeah. Yeah, maybe it is. And that might be the case. So if you have them, that's fine, but the university level you might not be able to use them. So keep that in mind there. So yeah, we had that question earlier. And it might be better if you don't use them, but it's up to you. If you need them, then you need them. But if that's the Queen's rules, then that would be the case on that. So thank you. Any other questions?
So
yeah.
Time starts when your slide goes, not when
Yep.
you start talking.
Right, when your slide goes. Yeah.
But we're not turned around looking at.
You signal to me and I'll get you started. Yeah. No. I'll get you started. That's fine. Yeah. So you should be fine. Yes.
And then we know we're on the last 2 seconds.
Well, you're the 30. So you just need to kind of keep the 1 minute and 30 seconds. So you just have to, as soon as she says you're done, yeah, you can just watch her, but just know when it's over, then you can hopefully finish up by then. You can finish early too. That's fine. So that's fine. What the other thing I wanted to say with that? Oh, so we are allowing one person who's going to be Skyping in. If you happen to win, you're not going to be able to do this next week. The competition is next week. So if you win, and you can't come next week at 11 o'clock on Thursday, let us know right away so we can have the second place winner go for the university competition. You have to be there in person. So that's really important. So the first place winner will receive $450, second place $325, and third place $225 from the college. So that's what we're here for. But only the number one will be able to go for the university competition there. So any other questions? So once we're done with all 13, then we have some refreshments that Sarah's got together. So you can eat those and enjoy your conversation, and the judges will finish up their tallying and give their numbers to me, and I'll put them together, and then we'll announce the winners from that point. Yes? As long as you want. Basically, it'll be how long it takes them to give me the numbers, 10, 15 minutes or so. But you can stick some in your pockets, take home with you, can eat. Anyway. All right. So are we ready? Okay, let's go ahead and get started.
There we go. Perfect. Check. Higher, maybe. How's that? All right. Imagine you're late for a job interview. You're driving down the road, it's blizzarding, and then you get a flat tire. At this moment, your body is experiencing automatic physiological reactions. For example, your blood pressure increases, your immune system slows down, and your pupils dilate. These processes are called stress responses. Overwhelming evidence has linked stress to the development and progression of health complications. Now imagine the same situation, except instead of driving alone, you have your best friend or your spouse in the passenger seat. My research investigates how having someone with you while experiencing a stressful event changes these stress responses. Pupillometry, or the measurement of pupil size, can capture the physiological response to stress almost instantaneously. The pupils dilate within 200 milliseconds of stress exposure. And although previous work has examined pupil dilation as a stress response, no one had yet investigated whether having someone with you while experiencing a stressful event changes the pupil dilation stress response. In order to study this question, I recruited married couples to participate in an experiment. I randomly assigned couples to come to my lab, either together or individually, and to complete a stress task. While they completed the stress task, I used an infrared camera to measure their pupil size. Results from this experiment showed that indeed, having a spouse with you while experiencing a stressor reduces or dampens pupil dilation compared to experiencing a stressor alone. This finding is consistent with other methods, such as blood pressure. However, this novel finding shows that the dampening effects are immediate, something only speculated up until now. My research demonstrates how quickly marriage can be beneficial in the face of stress. From these discoveries, I find myself with even more questions. For example, what if it wasn't your spouse in the experiment with you, but a friend, an acquaintance, maybe even a frenemy? And what if the stressor was, in fact, car troubles in a blizzard, watching a scary movie, dinner with the in-laws, or giving a 3-minute thesis? These are just some of the questions I'm currently pursuing, using the eye to glimpse our health. Thank you.
Okay. I have a jacket I can wear if needed. Okay.
Yeah, they have to tell me they're ready anyway.
This is not a prop. Those pants. And then. Okay. Thanks. Suicide is the second highest cause of death among youth in our nation. It is often accompanied with feelings of absolute hopelessness, which, in an instant, become too much to bear. Now, suicide is preventable. It takes the right tools, resources, and people to step in and help the individual step out of the pit of hopelessness and into the light of hope. However, because of stigma surrounding mental health, in addition to the fact that youth are more likely to discuss these thoughts with their peers than adults, youth are less likely to get the tools, resources, and people they need to overcome their hopelessness. Now, though these thoughts may make us feel hopeless, Obi-Wan Kenobi is no longer our only hope. You see, Hope Squads are school-based programs designed to help students create an environment of love, safety, and acceptance in their schools where they can express themselves and their feelings to both peers and adults without judgment. In addition, they're taught and made aware of the warning signs and symptoms of distress and suicidal thoughts, in addition to learning when to reach out, how to reach out, and when to get help from a trained professional. And in a 2017 Sharp data set, over 34,000 youth in Utah, of the 6% with a history of suicidal ideation, those in Hope Squad schools were 49% more likely to go to their adult or a parent about these thoughts, meaning they were that much more likely to get the life-saving help they needed when they needed it. So why are Hope Squad schools more likely to reach out than non-Hope Squad schools? Well, I study Russian, and the Russian verb надеяться means both to hope and to trust. And I hypothesized that hope and trust are related in more than just the Russian vocabulary. So I put it to the test. I took a sample of over 700 Hope Squad members from 69 schools across the nation, and I compared their scores on a test at the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year from the 2018-2019 Hope Squad Research Survey. The test consisted of questions such as, in the past 30 days, how many times have you gone to talk to an adult about a peer you were concerned for? In addition to, how strongly do you believe you can trust and even name an adult in their school that you could go to? Scores increase significantly across the school year, indicating that as trust increased in these students and the adults in their school, so did the likelihood that they would go to get help when, not if, thoughts of hopelessness began to strike. So what does this say about the students in our school? And what does this say about research and suicide prevention in general? Well, based upon these findings, we know hope is still the greatest aspect we have in fighting the rising tide of suicide in our nation. And if we want to start giving our youth more hope, then we should start by finding more ways we can give them someone that they can trust. Sorry.
Should I turn it off first?
I can.
All right. Let's see. Is this yeah, good? This is the same position that I was. That wasn't helpful. Maybe on this side. Is that a little? All right. I can figure out microphones. Grad students can do it. We made it to this point. Exercise is one of the most commonly prescribed suggestions in all of healthcare. And as an addiction researcher, what I was curious about is how exercise can interact with the reward circuitry directly. Now, the reward circuitry is the part of the brain that is hijacked by drugs of abuse like cocaine, alcohol, methamphetamine, heroin, right? And these drugs of abuse, they operate on a particular system generally called the opioid receptor system. It's one of the most potent modulators. And there are essentially two parts to this system. There's the part that makes you feel really good, and there's the part that makes you feel really bad. And as you might expect, in people who are exposed to alcohol over long periods of time, the part that makes you feel really good is not so sensitive. And the part that makes you feel really bad is hypersensitized. And so my first figure that I'd like to point out here is this graph over here, which demonstrates that in animals that were allowed to exercise while they were exposed to alcohol, they only experienced about 50% of the same hypersensitization that occurred in normally exposed animals. Exercise is preventing some of this. Now, we wanted to know exactly what part of exercise was really making a difference here, because as you all know, when we exercise, it raises your heart rate, it can break down your muscles, it changes blood pressure, releasing hormones, countless things. But our hypothesis was actually much simpler than that. Whenever you exercise, you undergo a lot of movement. And there are special molecules in our body called mechanoreceptors that are sensitive to that movement. They help us experience touch and help us know where our body is in space. And it just so happens that these same molecules synapse directly onto the reward circuitry exactly where these opioid receptors are expressed. So what we did is we stopped having the animals exercise and implanted a small motor into their spine that vibrated at a frequency that stimulated these receptors. And what we found is that the same changes to opioid receptors in the reward circuitry occurred as when the animals were exercising. Not only that, but these animals experienced fewer symptoms of withdrawal and drank less alcohol when given the opportunity. Movement component alone may be enough to ameliorate the changes to the opioid receptors that occur in addiction and help recovering addicts. So next time you don't feel like you want to go to the gym, maybe just get up off the couch, go for a walk, and do something like that consistently, because when it comes to the reward circuitry at least, it may just be a matter of move it or lose it. Thank you.
Now. Okay. We're going to sort fact from fiction today by playing one round of the game, Two Truths and a Lie, where I will tell you 3 statements, and you try and figure out which 2 are true and which 1 is false. Statement number 1, if parents talk to their children about sex, kids will get curious and go have sex. Statement number 2, most kids want to learn about sex from their parents. And statement number 3, kids often turn to their friends or to the media to learn about sex if parents aren't teaching them. The great news for parents is that statement number 1 is false. Despite what many parents believe, talking to kids about sex does not give kids a green light to go have sex. The goal for parents, because conversation matters and the way we do it, is to have comfortable back and forth conversations with their children about sex. This comfortable conversation is known as open communication, and research tells us that open parent-child sex communication leads to kids actually putting off having sex, and then having fewer sexual partners, reliable condom use, a lower risk of STIs, and less risky sexual behaviors. In other words, talking to children about sex does not make kids have sex sooner, and when they do become sexually active, they practice safer sex. Now, those other 2 statements are true. Most kids report wanting to learn about sex from their parents, not from their friends or the media. So how do we support parents in talking openly with their children about sex when most parents report feeling unknowledgeable and uncomfortable in these discussions? This is where my research comes in. I am investigating what characteristics of parents affect how openly they talk with their children about sex. We know that open communication leads to healthy results in children's lives, but scholars have yet to discover what helps some parents talk so openly. I expect that parents who feel confident in their teaching ability will be more likely to talk openly with their children about sex, and parents who feel good about their own sexuality will be more likely to teach their children confidently. I tested these hypotheses with over 2,000 diverse parents of teenagers from across the United States, and preliminary results confirm that when parents feel good about their own sexuality, they are more confident in teaching their children. And open parent-child sex communication was shown to increase as parents felt more confident in this teaching ability. As we continue to test parent characteristics, we will be able to help parents move away from the fiction our culture has believed about parent-child sex communication and move them toward what is fact, which includes how open parent-child sex communication leads to the greatest results in their lives. Thank you.
If I weren't following that one, I don't think anyone would have noticed that my presentation has no sex in it. How's that? Good?
Just have to wait till.
Okay. Let's see. Is it touching me? Is there a better way to turn it? Is that good? Okay, how do I look? I can do this from memory if I have to, but I timed it with notes, so. I want you to think back on the last time you tried to describe a troublesome sound to your car mechanic. You were an expert in your experience in the context of the problem, and your mechanic was likely an expert in the potential solutions. But I imagine that without driving your car, the mechanic might have some trouble knowing how to help you, regardless of how well you make the sounds with your mouth that your car is trying to make. This is the challenge faced by global development engineers all around the world. Many are trying to move beyond just economic and environmental sustainability to include social impact as well. But this is really difficult given the gap between expertise in the problem and expertise in potential solutions. I was invited to consult one of these engineering teams as they attempted to use collaborative design to develop equipment for rural farmers deep in the Brazilian Amazon. As a student, I was curious how different groups of people would approach this collaboration. So for the last year, I performed an ethnography of the project, including weekly meetings and 2 trips into the rainforest. Here are some preliminary findings. Disparate groups approach problems and define success very differently. This is partly because we're all operating in different institutional environments with distinct logics that shape the way we prioritize and frame things. Our political and business collaborators were most concerned with economic opportunities, while subsistence farmers mostly viewed this as an opportunity to decrease the workload, to pursue other interests, and to make traditional life more appealing to the next generation. The engineers sometimes struggled to incorporate these conflicting perspectives in their design. It's often easiest to listen to whichever collaborator is picking up the tab, and some perspectives are more difficult than others to incorporate and square with the engineering logic itself. So I'll end with an example. Last week, I was able to visit an Amazonian tribe that only has outside visitors once every 2 or 3 years. We were invited to visit because of their interest in the engineers' project. The chief told me that they had carved their village out of the jungle, but that the jungle relentlessly tries to grow back into that space. And it takes a persistent effort just to keep it at bay. They also, however, had incorporated some elements of the jungle as domesticated food sources, and they allow their children to roam freely in the jungle, even barefoot, so that they'll learn how to navigate it. This yin-yang relationship, a bit of chaos in the order, order in the chaos, seemed the perfect imagery for their relationship with the jungle of modernity. Much of their effort goes into keeping it at bay, with some elements allowed in on their own terms, and some encouragement to explore. But here's the point. The engineers designing this farming equipment are mechanics to a car they've never seen before and didn't build. How can they translate local perspectives into the inputs, outputs, and matrices that engineers use to measure success? Perhaps they can't, but they can at least run through the jungle for a day, and that's a start. And we have evidence that suggests it's making a difference. Thank you.
All right, are we good on sound? Okay. Ready? I just moved here from Las Vegas, and while I've been told that dating is a little different here than it was back in Sin City, I have seen an episode of that YouTube show, The Provo Bachelor. And I know that you guys also have good relationships and really bad relationships, but that's true of every place in America, right? In fact, half of all marriages end in divorce. That could be you or the person sitting right next to you. And whether you're dating or married, couple distress is related to decreased life satisfaction, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and negative outcomes for the children who get caught in the crossfire. We're not just talking about a bad YouTube show. We're talking about a crisis for couples and families in America. Understanding romantic relationships is essential to the healthy functioning of our society. In order to better understand romantic relationship types and the things that relate to being in those different relationship groups, we performed a latent class analysis with automated variable selection and bootstrap sampling, and a sample of nearly 2,000 college students in romantic relationships. Essentially, we were looking for patterns in their responses that would justify the existence of different groups and tell us what variables relate to being in them. We found 3 distinct groups: unhealthy and unsatisfied, healthy and satisfied, and finally, healthy and satisfied with the relationship, but not satisfied with the partner. Folks in the unhealthy and unsatisfied relationship tended to have higher neuroticism, to be in longer relationships that they believed were sacred or holy, and had attachment styles that were described as anxious or avoidant. Folks in both types of healthy groups were more dedicated to their relationship and were sexually satisfied. But people who were exclusively satisfied tended to have marriage engagement and be exclusively dating, as opposed to folks who were not satisfied with their partner. They didn't have that same correlation with commitment, and they tended to be women who were older. Understanding romantic relationship types and the variables that are associated with them are the crucial first steps in improving couples, families, and society. Does that sound okay? Okay. What? Mm-hmm. We live in a death-denying society. This is a picture of me and my mother. I'm 15 years old and my mom is my best friend. Exactly 2 years after this photo was taken, my mom died. Her death catapulted me into a journey to understand and come to terms with the concept of grief. I began university 1 month after my mother's funeral. I was ill-equipped to handle the pressures of college life, coupled with my grief in the wake of excruciating parental loss. My grief and subsequent mental health led me to research, trying to understand what my peers were doing to handle their own losses. What were they doing to remember their loved one? How was it affecting them? I designed a research study using qualitative methodology to investigate the self-reported impact both traditional and non-traditional commemorative practices had on bereaved young adults similar to myself.
Traditional could look like attending a funeral, visiting a grave, or celebrating your loved one on their birthday. Non-traditional could be planting flower over their remains, wearing their necklace, or getting a tattoo. Similar to my own situation, I found that almost a third of college students had experienced the death of a loved one in the past 12 months. Grief psychologist Pamela Malone has said that we live in a death-denying society. How does this mentality affect our responses to grief? A 2015 study found that young adults reported being told that their grief had a timeline and should move in specific stages. These constructs are harmful. They set limiting expectations as to what grief can and should look like. An essential act in the grieving process is remembering your loved one, commemoration. It's important to be aware of the differences between traditional and non-traditional practices because they have different impacts. How was this presented in my research? I interviewed 22 young adults who had experienced a loss in the past 10 years, and through those interviews, I found that there was a higher reporting for positive emotions following non-traditional commemorative practices than when participants engaged in traditional ones. Understanding this was essential in shifting my own paradigm that grief must look, feel, and be a certain way. This data gives the first step in solving misguided grief counseling. It is important to be aware of the differences. Grief and commemoration responses should always be unique to the needs of the person experiencing them. Understanding this can help shift the field of grief counseling, both as professionals and as members of families and communities. It is liberating as mental health professionals, families, students, teachers, parents, and friends to know that you are not confined to traditional expectations when it comes to your grief and commemoration. When you embrace what feels right for you and your grieving needs in spite of traditional constructs and parameters, research has shown that your grieving journey and mental health are deepened and improved. We do not have to live in a death-denying society. Thank you.
Can people hear me? Are you sure? I feel self-conscious about this mic. It's fine. I'm going to stand on this side of the light. What would it be like to move to a completely new place where people looked at you and automatically assumed you were too different from them? Now imagine you were born in this new place, though your parents were not, and people still looked at you and treated you differently. How would you cope with the isolation you felt? And how long before you turned to something destructive? As a budding mental health professional, I wanted to know the answers to these questions, particularly for African immigrants. African immigration has increased by 137% since 2005 to 2013 and has continued to increase. These people often have to learn new languages and adjust to new social roles. Their children deal with dual cultures, trying to fit in while holding on to family roots. All this against a backdrop of racism and discrimination towards people of color in the US. Yet, we know relatively little about how these people cope with such stressors. So, I looked at data from a nationwide survey of 409 African immigrants representing 37 countries. The majority of these participants were Black, with most of them also being female. I wanted to know how discrimination affected the mental health of these people, and if those who came directly from their African country of origin coped differently than those who were born in the US but had at least one African parent. Of note, the majority of participants had a college or graduate degree, and 71% did not use substances to cope. However, many reported they frequently feel threatened and harassed. First-generation immigrants often seek comfort through spiritual beliefs and social support, but if a second-generation immigrant feels intensely discriminated against, they are over 200% more likely to use substances to cope. Growing up in the US leaves these people broken to the point of turning to something destructive. Those who turn to a community, even in the face of discrimination, are able to reduce their mental distress significantly, but not all immigrants have communities they can turn to. What would it be like if we did something about this? As mental health advocates, we can support policy that encourages cultural humility and create a space where these people can heal from unique stressors. We can develop culture-specific resources that help these people turn towards positive coping styles. And as fellow humans, we can look at those who are different from us and wonder what it would be like to be in their shoes.
Is that okay? So, great. According to data from the CDC, from 2000 to 2014, the number of diagnosed cases of autism in the US went from 1 in 150 children to 1 in 59. Now, during this time frame, the diagnosis became recognized as a spectrum by clinicians, including a much wider variety of individuals, including children with limited verbal abilities, as well as higher functioning children who are capable of taking care of themselves. With such a wide range of verbal and cognitive skills within the same diagnosis, it can be difficult to find a single intervention or a set of interventions that best fits an individual. However, with the delineation of subgroups of autism, this could be radically different, and one factor in particular is poised to do just that. Cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF as it is commonly referred to, is a clear, colorless fluid that surrounds the brain and plays an important role in carrying away toxic waste products from neurons after they fire. Now, the link with autism and CSF is interesting and rather unexpected, and occurred when a radiologist was examining the MRI scans of infants who were part of a multi-year study at the University of North Carolina. They saw what you are looking at now. Here we have some MRI scans of 9-month-old infants. On the top, we have scans coming from a typically developing child, and on the bottom, we have scans coming from a child who would be diagnosed with autism a little over a year later. In white, surrounding the brain, we can see CSF. And as you can tell, in the autistic child, there's a much greater volume of CSF than the typically developing child. Now, the results from that study were this. CSF volume at 12 to 15 months could predict an autism diagnosis at 24 months with 79% specificity, which is 19% better than parental concerns. Now, they also found that CSF volume could predict the severity of the autism symptoms. So where does that leave us today? My research is focused on and looks at the volume of CSF throughout the lifespan in both autistic and typically developing children through the use of 719 MRI images. We hope to delineate subgroups of autism so that we can better treat and understand the trajectory of this disorder as these children become 1 in 59 adults. Thank you.
Not on. Is that better? Sorry, I wasn't ready. I had begun to become comfortable with her, so that made this experience, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out entirely. The experiences of male survivors of sexual abuse are underappreciated or have been underinvestigated in the research literature. Sexual abuse has become a much more common topic in public discourse, especially with the rise of the hashtag #MeToo. Yet these conversations have primarily focused on women. Now, women are the primary survivor, or make up the majority of survivors of sexual abuse. Yet some studies have found that 1 in 6 men experiences sexual abuse before the age of 18. 1 in 6. So where are all these men? We don't hear their experiences often, and the research literature is very sparse when it comes to male sexual abuse. Why? One of the reasons that my research explains has to do with gender socialization theory. Basically, this is the idea that the way we're brought up has profound impacts on what we believe about being a man or a woman. So you've all heard these ideas. Things like men are supposed to be tough and men are less emotional. Now, the experience of sexual trauma can have profound impacts on emotions, complex emotional responses. We also are brought up with the idea that men are supposed to be more sexual, the initiators. Yet we see that male survivors, when they hear these types of messages, get the idea that, well, maybe sexual abuse doesn't happen to men, or if it did happen, you should have been tougher to be able to fight back, or even you must have enjoyed it. Now, my research looks at qualitative results or the stories of male survivors themselves. And past research has faced the difficulty of data collection. If male survivors aren't talking about their experiences, if they've been stigmatized and put into silence by these cultural norms, then how are we supposed to gain access to their stories? My research uses innovative data collection sources. Online discussion forums, which through their anonymity have opened a window into the experiences of male survivors. By exploring their experiences, specifically their experiences in relationships, my research can help more male survivors know that they're not alone in their struggles, and can help their partners, family members, friends, mental health professionals know how to better support them. It can help them have experiences like the one explained by another survivor who said, "For the first time, I'm not alone." Well, thanks. Should have used my notes.
I'm doing a PhD, if that surprises you. Can't work this. Schizophrenia is a really tough mental disorder. Not only do patients suffer from disabling symptoms, but many also are homeless, institutionalized, or wrongly incarcerated. Because this condition is so poorly understood, these people are often unjustly stigmatized, stereotyped, and villainized. While people with schizophrenia only contribute to less than 5% of our violence rates, the media, unfortunately, characterizes these individuals as dangerous or threatening, as if these people aren't struggling with enough as it is. What has happened is schizophrenia has been categorized as an extremely misunderstood disorder. both from a personal and causal standpoint. Psychosis, which involves types of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, is a condition where someone's internal experience and reality are split. In other words, they can't function because their symptoms are distorting their reality and their perception of what is actually going on, as seen through hallucinations and delusions. Despite our current understanding of what we do know of psychosis, there is much we don't actually know. In particular, we don't know the parts of the brain that are involved in these symptoms that distort their realities or in their thinking problems that they experience, like poor concentration and memory skills. What we do know is that there are specific regions of the brain that are involved and responsible for our emotions and our memory abilities. This is the limbic system. Now, there is some evidence that suggests that the limbic system plays an important role in expressing these symptoms that we see and these problems that we see in psychosis. Now, there is also strong evidence that there is a genetic piece to schizophrenia. Heritability is almost 80%. And family members of people with schizophrenia who don't have the disorder often exhibit thinking problems like patients, but to a lesser degree. Now, this is an interesting observation for us in the research world because it emphasizes the larger genetic picture and provides clues as to how symptoms are expressed in this disorder. So, including individuals who are non-affected first-degree relatives who potentially carry the genes provides a more meaningful model for figuring out what is or is not genetic. So the aim of my project is to look at the abnormalities of the limbic system in patients with psychosis and their first-degree relatives. I will be looking at brain imaging data from a worldwide repository that includes over 6,000 subjects. Hopefully, we can help destigmatize them. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, that's good. I want you to close your eyes and envision a special woman in your life. Now, open your eyes, but keep the image of her in your mind. Imagine she tells you that her husband or partner has been physically abusing her. He hits her, punches her, her arms and legs are covered with bruises. Now, you might be thinking, this could never happen to her, but it could. Research has shown that nearly 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence at some point in their lives. So my question for all of you is, how would you respond to her? Well, there are a few ways you could. You could respond positively, showing her love and support. You could respond negatively, blaming her for the violence. Or your response could be ambivalent. You could support her and blame her. So maybe you, someone important and meaningful to her, would respond with positivity. However, for many women experiencing domestic violence, they have been isolated from the most supportive connections because of their abuser. This leaves women to confide in people who are negative and ambivalent. We know that positive responses are helpful and beneficial. We know that negative responses lead to serious health issues, such as anxiety, depression, PTSD. But what exactly do ambivalent responses do? Well, the purpose of my research is to find out how these ambivalent responses coming from family members and friends impact a woman's physical and mental well-being. How will I do this? women who are seeking help from a domestic violence crisis center will be given a questionnaire. On this questionnaire, they will report the type of responses they received from other people. It is proposed that women who received ambivalent responses will report having worse mental and physical well-being than the women who received positive responses. So why is this important? Why will this help? Well, knowing this information, therapists will be better able to help women understand the relationships they have with other people and help them determine whether or not someone is safe enough and positive enough to confide in. This research begins the examination of how to protect women from this additional horrible trauma. This research study fills a crucial gap in the literature that is yet to be explored, while offering both help and hope to the millions of women who experience domestic violence each and every day. Thank you.
When you were a teenager, was your personality more similar to or different from the personality of your parents? Maybe your love for organization matched your mother's, making you two peas in a pod. Maybe your need to talk things through complemented your father's opposite preference for listening. Or maybe your shared tendency to react strongly to things made you butt heads with your parents when you were a teenager. This match between parent and child personalities is what developmental psychologists call goodness of fit. And a good fit can protect teens from a whole host of negative problems. It's important to note, though, that both similarities and differences can make for a good fit. It all depends on context. My research focuses on understanding goodness of fit in a very specific context, adolescent shyness. Now, many of us might consider ourselves shy to some degree or another, maybe especially when giving a timed presentation. But for the purpose of research, Shy adolescents are considered those who want to participate socially, but who also experience a lot of fear in social situations, making them want to withdraw. Because adolescence is a time period so heavily focused on socializing, these conflicting motivations can lead to issues with depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and peer rejection. Shy teens also struggle making friends and oftentimes have poor quality friendships, suggesting that parents may be the ones with the most power to help. But what does a good fit look like for a shy teen who wants to both approach and withdraw from social situations? Would it be a more introverted parent who can understand their child's need to withdraw and help them feel validated? Or a more extroverted parent who can appropriately push their child out of their comfort zone in a way to help them develop social skills? This is the question I sought to answer with my research. To do so, I used data from a study of around 500 teenagers and their parents who were surveyed yearly for about 10 years. I looked at how shyness during adolescence was related to negative outcomes like depression, anxiety, and shame, and positive outcomes like interactions with friends and strangers during the young adult years. I then examined whether having an introverted or extroverted parent changed the relationship between shyness and these outcomes. Interestingly, I found that shyness during adolescence was more strongly related to feelings of shame during young adulthood for those with highly extroverted parents. Similarly, having a more introverted parent would increase the likelihood of shy teens being able to have positive interactions with peers during the young adult years. So what does this all mean? Well, having a more introverted parent seems to be the better fit for shy teens. So if you find yourself the parent of a shy teen, whether your personality makes you two peas in a pod or apples and oranges, a little understanding and validation can go a long way. Thank you.